What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and I got another video for you today because there's some shenanigans going on around the internet yet again. Big surprise, right? Yeah, I know, what else is new? From Helldivers 2 still being hammered about inclusion and diversity, a Gearbox writer doubling down to defend Sweet Baby, Pokemon is apparently going full-blown DEI, and much more. There's so much nonsense, so let's start with Helldivers 2. From Pink News, we have this article titled, LGBTQ+ Helldivers players complain of rampant and surreal in-game toxicity. As if the discourse surrounding Helldivers 2 could get any more muddied and ridiculous, the nonsense just keeps coming. In case you don't know, Helldivers 2 is very much an anti-pretty much everything game. What I mean by this is that there are no real-world symbols within Helldivers world whatsoever. There's no LGBT flags, no Make America Great Again symbols, or any other country at all. The game is simply just Helldivers and that's it, and of course because this game doesn't bend the knee in any direction for anyone, this has angered certain demographics out there. The reason being is simply because every single Western game pretty much to some capacity caters to or completely bends over backwards for these groups. Of course it's usually marketed as being a win, but the reality is most Western studios know if they don't cater to these specific groups like the LGBTQ+ crowd, they'll get swarmed and then torn to pieces. And on the other hand, you have the majority of players like yourself probably who just want to escape and play some video games. The reason why Helldivers fans specifically are so against real-world representation in all forms is because it would break the immersion of the game's world. It would be like playing Dark Souls and randomly the flag of a real-world country showing up within the game's world. It would completely change the feel and believability of the game's landscape, and it would ruin the escapism that players rightfully seek out when playing video games. And like I said, pretty much every single Western game bends well over backwards to appease all of these groups, so Helldivers refusing to is seen as a big no-no in their eyes. And they have in the past already said things like, well, what harm could one flag or rainbow cape really cause? Well, you know as well as I do that as soon as there's a crack in the dam, soon will the crashing waves of nonsense come flooding through until the entire experience is drowning in all the real-world symbolisms and more. Of course, many players who are LGBT are mad about this, but I think it's fair and right of the studio to not want to seek out the ongoing culture war. And I think Helldivers is resounding proof that will hopefully change the industry for the better. And again, what I mean by this is look at the Gamergate 2 situation right now. It's a complete mess. There's so much happening with it right now, and the term Sweet Baby Inc. involved is akin to pretty much taking your game out back and putting 2 mercy shots in its head. Helldivers proves that you can sell millions of copies in a short span of time as long as you don't pander and don't bend to the every demand of every single group that's out there. And it also annoys me that these articles like this one and others seem to paint the situation as somehow being pro-conservative because of their stance. That Arrowhead Studios not allowing pride flags in Helldivers is somehow a win for right-wing players when they too have their symbolisms rejected in equal measure. I want to be clear that what Helldivers devs are doing here is not a gotcha or negative against any one group. They are treating everyone with the same mentality. None of your symbols are allowed, they don't care who you are or what you represent, just keep it out of the game. But I think why this is a hot topic issue is simply because these sorts of players, and of course the journalists who rally and protect them, are not used to being rejected like this. They are obviously used to having their every demand fulfilled. Oh, you want a rainbow flag? Well, why isn't there a demigender flag? Oh, an asexual icon or badge? Why isn't there any pro-non-binary imagery in the game? You see what I mean? It keeps going. Eventually, when you do pander, you end up creating a non-stop deluge of demands that pretty much will never end because you can never satisfy everyone's needs and wants in a realistic fashion. So instead, your game ends up just becoming this big self-identifying mess than what it should remain as, which is of course a video game. One user on Twitter, which was linked to the article, said this: enjoyed Helldivers 2, but the creative director saying this while their Discord has been rampant with racist, anti-LGBTQ+ hatred since launch is just laughable. What they're referring to is how the CEO of Arrowhead didn't want to compare Helldivers to communities like Halo and thinks everyone should just play and enjoy both or neither. And there's no point in comparing or pitting them against one another, and he's right. Just play whatever the hell you want, whether it's Halo, Helldivers, or something else. Who cares which one is better than the other one in whichever arbitrary category you're pushing on those games? They're completely different experiences to begin with, so just play what makes you happy and move on. But of course, like that user who was used in the article said, it isn't enough for them. How can the Arrowhead CEO be all kumbaya about not comparing the Helldivers and Halo community while his game doesn't allow for LGBTQ+ representation? The simple answer is because Arrowhead CEO is an adult and understands that realistically, he nor his team can appease everyone. I mean, if you actually go look at the CEO's Twitter, it says this: a game for everyone is a game for no one. And he's right, and clearly his studio's game exemplifies this perfectly because he knows better than anyone that you can't cater to every single person's wishes. An Arrowhead CEO likely understands that if he does pander like so many of his fellow studios do, all it will end up doing is ruining the player base that's already there, and as we've seen all month so far with the Sweet Baby Backlash, when you piss off the players, you gain nothing but disdain and rage in return. Literally, all Helldivers needs to continue doing is what they've been doing since day one. They don't need to cater to anything whatsoever. They just have to keep adding new weapons, gear, and missions to the game to keep the player base happy. That's it. And if Helldivers 2 ever does end up pandering to anyone regardless of political ideology, that's the day Helldivers 2 and the franchise at large dies. And I think Sony, hopefully, is starting to realize that not only are these cheaper made games profitable since AAA game development costs are completely out of whack, but they also realize that when they keep the real world stupidity out of their games, players will show up in droves. They did it for Helldivers. Even Final Fantasy XVI sold 3 million copies in 3 days since launch. And journos tried to push their way into that game and make it bend the knee, but Square Enix said no. And I think more game studios, publishers, and the like need to take the stance of Helldivers or Final Fantasy XVI. Just say no to all of these idiots. We don't need to cater to everything or put a bunch of political jargon in the games. Just make them fun escapism, and big surprise, players will show up in hordes. And now let's look at the complete opposite of what Arrowhead CEO at Helldivers is doing with that Parkplace.com with their article titled Xbox's head of gaming for everyone and sustainability, Katie Jo Wright, confirms company is committing financial suicide. If you don't intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. Katie Jo Wright is yet another person whose job is just a made-up nonsense title. What the hell kind of position is head of gaming for everyone and sustainability? Like, why is that even a thing to begin with? Like, I've been saying for well over 2 years now at least, you cannot make a game for everyone. I can't believe I need to say what I'm saying next, but I feel like I need to explain this like I'm talking to a toddler so these morons will understand. You see, there's these things in entertainment. They're called genres, and each genre caters to different groups of people. There's the action genre, horror's one too, comedy, and with video games you even got stuff like RPGs or RTS genres. The reason the entire concept of genres exists is because you can't make games for everyone with one single product. Unless someone out there manages to make a live service action RPG horror game with real life sim elements that also has a full-blown Civilization RTS mode attached, but is also a first-person shooter, third person at times, and the game also somehow manages to switch to 2D animations too, while also having a battle royale, well, this will ever exist. You just can't do it. You can't. Obviously, this Xbox head with their made-up job title exists to simply only push ESG practices into video games. As Katie Wright puts it, if you don't intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. That is how we are as human beings. There is no shame in that. If you want to include, you have to be intentional about that. As that Parkplace.com points out, what Katie Wright is saying here is very similar to what Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, said back in 2017, which was, you have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And really what Larry Fink said 7 years ago at this point still rings true today. It is all about forcing behaviors. And you can circle that back to Helldivers 2 and the push for LGBT representation as well. Even these groups who get catered to like crazy, it isn't just about representation for them. It's equally about forcing every studio, franchise, or whatever else to cater because if they don't, you have to force them into doing so. And thankfully, with the rise of Twitter's free speech being more prominent in places like YouTube here to an extent, the forcing of these policies have lessened to a degree. And people are becoming more confident to speak out against these things because they obviously don't agree with it. What Wright and Fink are saying here about forcing, I mean, it's like trying to force someone into being interested into you or something. You can't force someone into liking you, because the basis of human emotions have and always will be a natural thing that happens through free will. Once you have to strong arm or push someone into believing or doing something, then ultimately what you're doing is obviously not natural and it ends up happening through intimidation or fear, instead of genuine passion or willpower. But that's what this is all about. They know what they're pushing is not what the public wants. And I think Xbox's head of imaginary job positions over here pushing these concepts onto the multitude of teams beneath them is very obviously a bad decision. And I think when developers are forcing to make games they obviously don't care for, that's how you end up with misfires that review and sell poorly. But if devs are allowed to make what they want, that's how you end up with Helldivers, Palworld, or even previous hits like Hollow Knight and more. You can try to force your behaviors all you want, but ultimately the human spirit will eventually, and rightfully so, push back when enough is enough. Like you know as well as I do, when you go to a job you genuinely like or get to enjoy the things you like if it's video games, maybe going for a run or playing with your pets, you do it because it gives you joy. And how much does it suck to go to a job that you hate? Believe me, I've been there. I've had quite a few jobs in the past that I absolutely hated with every fiber of my being. When I was 17 years old, I was a bag boy at a grocery store. I hated that job, dude. Going in and out from hot to cold, over and over, bagging groceries, because I was a kid with no real world experience. It was awful. Not to mention, the pay was next to nothing. Back then, minimum wage here in Canada was around $8.50 an hour. Can you imagine making $8.50 an hour in today's economy? But that's the thing, it's because of free will and the ability to forge your own path that you can do more with your life. And I believe it's the same when it comes to things like entertainment and more. These people can force things all they want. Ultimately, like I've said before, the power is and always will be in the people's hands. And the free market will absolutely decide which way the pendulum swings, and customers like you or I don't have to buy anything made by people who clearly hate us. I don't have to buy some slop this Katie Jo Wright signs off on because it checks boxes. And if enough things flop because of her made-up head of gaming for everyone in sustainability position, which is still such a stupid name for a job title, but regardless, no one needs to buy or support anything any of these people make. And I firmly believe the more escapism you try to remove from your product that should be all about escapism, will just result in a product that fails. It's just as Arrowhead CEO said, a game for everyone is a game for no one. But people like Wright and Fink obviously think that's a load of baloney, and they can change the human spirit into accepting things by forcing behaviors, and well, okay, you can try that if you wanna. But I think the way things are going, it doesn't seem to be working whatsoever. I mean, you're watching this right now, aren't you? You probably don't want to play nothing that forces anything on you, and who can blame me for that? I don't, it makes perfect sense to me. Sadly, some companies are still going down the path of ESG, and it's puzzling me like this article from That Park Place titled, "The Pokemon Company Doubles Down on Wokeness with Job Listing for Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Social Responsibility." Man, that's a mouthful. Yeah, unfortunately, Pokemon of all things is doubling down on ESG and DEI practices. When if you ask me, Nintendo should be prioritizing quality control over Pokemon instead of pronouns and whatnot, because Pokemon Scarlet and Violet were some of the most mid Pokemon games I've ever played. Look, I would consider myself a longtime Pokemon fan. I played all the games growing up, watched the movies, and wrestled kids over their cards. Yes, we would get into fights as kids over Pokemon cards, it was a different time anyways. But isn't it crazy that you can look at this footage of my Violet playthrough and realize this game is barely a few years old? It looks terrible. But beyond looking bad, they run like dog water, yet Nintendo and Game Freak are not prioritizing fixing that. Instead, they want to put messaging into the games instead. This job position is for someone in Washington. The actual job title is Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Social Responsibility. I figure I just read you what this job posting requires because it's, and I quote, "The Director, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Social Responsibility facilitates and promotes the Pokemon Company International's global culture of innovation, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. This role will partner with the DEI-SR team to build diversity, equity, and inclusion and social responsibility initiatives and programs to influence employee engagement, talent acquisition, talent management, charitable community engagement, and marketable opportunities across our global team to engage and retain talent and foster relationships in local and global communities. This role will ensure that the core elements of the Pokemon Company culture are well defined and ever present to employees, highlighting engagement as an essential component to support a positive, diverse, inclusive, innovative, and high-achieving environment. This position will report to the Vice President and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, lead the DEI Social Responsibility team, and will partner with stakeholders across the organization and operate as an internal business consultant, end quote. The position will start around $177,000 a year to around $211,000 on the higher end, and the position can eventually scale closer to $267,000 with experience. That's a lot of money for a made-up job about nothing. But I should point out, in that job description, it says the job will be used to push programs to influence employee engagement. That's another way of saying forcing behaviors, by the way, the same way the other two executives prior in this video were saying. Also, Nintendo and Game Freak have pledged $25 million to other groups within their company to enforce and push diversity. Some of these groups include Women of Pokemon, the Rainbow Gym, you can guess right away what that one's about, and stuff like Familia Pokemon. That last one, by the way, even uses Western mind virus language in their mission statement, which reads, "We are a group of Latinx Hispanic employees who are united by experiences, food, language, and so many other aspects of our culture. We come together as a familia, which means family in Spanish and Portuguese. And our purpose is to foster the professional development of our members in the interactive entertainment industry, as well as to facilitate recruitment and retention of our talent while promoting awareness and inclusion of the Latinx Hispanic community and culture." Latinx. Oh, that term doesn't even make sense in their language, because the entire dialect revolves around male and female gendered words. There is no Latinx. And now you're telling me this nonsense will definitely influence the future of Pokemon? So not only are the future Pokemon games cooked from their tired designs, piss poor performance, terrible frame rates, and more, but instead of fixing any of the real problems, they're just adding a bunch of nonsense on top of the shit pile. No idea if these groups, including a whole other diversity group as well that's called the Pokemon Diaspora, which is another DEI group Nintendo is pushing, which is for black representation in Pokemon, will have any influence on future games. But I think it's safe to say that Nintendo is clearly not hearing the pleas of their player base whatsoever. You're about to get more Pokemon games of either the same terrible quality or worse with enough DEI to drown a Magikarp somehow. Wonderful, I can't wait. Finally, we have that Gearbox writer whose name is Sam Winkler. Don't harass this person, but anyway, they're defending consultants like Sweet Baby as well. Sam has apparently written Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, whose story was not good and the quests were completely forgettable. I would know since I played it, but I forgot most of it because it was boring. And he also did Borderlands 3, which is his other credit, which is not the only thing, because Borderlands 3 is easily considered to be the worst story and writing in the entire series. I platinumed Borderlands 3 because it's fun to play, but its character, story, and quests were simply just annoying to listen to. At a certain point, I just muted the game when doing quests sometimes because the characters wouldn't stop screaming in my ear, and I listened to some heavy metal music instead. So Sam is already kind of on shaky ground with his objectively bad writing credits, but anyways. He said this: "I see this argument all the time against DEI and consultancy, and it just highlights a total misunderstanding of what being a good writer is. You don't somehow max out your stats and learn how to write every conceivable character, plot, or prose style. Knowing you can't, aren't ready, or aren't the right person to write something is one of the chief skills for a pro writer. Ideally, you have a team that can cover all your bases, but if you have a gap, you hire an outside expert, just like in literally any other effing other industry. Just further evidence that 99.99% of the people spewing this shit have never created a single thing in their lives that they're proud of, and the rest are just straight up bigots." So what Sam is saying here is that you have to bring in consulting groups to consult you on characters you can't write yourself. Because of whatever reason, such as you're a white guy and the character you have to write is a black woman, so naturally you apparently have no idea how to write them because you're not that character. It's a load of BS in my opinion, since the most beloved black superhero Black Panther was literally made by two white guys smoking cigarettes in a room. And I think this whole "you have to look like what you write" completely misses the point of what writing is all about. And actually, from this guy's standpoint, a game like Final Fantasy XVI then can't exist to begin with, because it stars predominantly white European-looking people, but the story was written by a Japanese person. And the entire game is made by Japanese people, so by Sam's stupid standards here, 16 can't reasonably exist. Or I guess Ghost of Tsushima shouldn't either, since a bunch of people in San Francisco made a game about Japan. Yet the only people who bitched about that game were other woke journalists. And actually, key dev members of Ghost of Tsushima actually got officially recognized by Tsushima's authorities, and the game is championed and loved by Japanese players. So tell me, Sam, how do you need to look like the characters you write again? Oh right, yeah, that's complete nonsense, and you're just another woke pandering SBI defender is what it is. You don't need to look like anything to make or write or do anything is what I think. The only people who think this way are the reasons why entertainment sucks ass these days anyways. And again, I don't think the guy who wrote objectively the worst Borderlands story and characters ever has any genuine opinion that should be taken as gospel. My guy, your team wrote the character named Ava in Borderlands 3. That alone is insult enough. You should be legally barred from ever writing anything again for creating the slopfest of a story that was Borderlands 3. You somehow made 2 insufferable twins into your villains, you killed a fan favorite, and then you gave the Crimson Raiders to your annoying kid character that everyone who played Borderlands 3 hated. Like, nobody likes Ava. No one. Not even Ava likes Ava. Borderlands 3's story is actually so bad it's incredible it even exists in the first place. So shame on Sam for making such a bad story and characters, and Tiny Tina Wonderlands was poorly written too. That game is the epitome of play on mute and ignore everything the game. So if you want my opinion, fellas, ignore Sam. Maybe when he actually ends up writing something good, he can have an opinion on writing. But until that happens, he should just stay quiet and maybe take some writing lessons. Because if your writing credits involve Borderlands 3, that says everything, dude. What a bad story and characters, good lord. Anyways, you can see from forcing behaviors and rejecting them in Helldivers, Xbox, or the Pokemon Company, or this Borderlands dummy, there's still a lot of stuff going on in the games industry. You ask me, forcing behaviors is lame, write whatever the hell you want, and Pokemon has sucked for years now, so we just gotta accept it, I guess. As always, thank you for watching, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the video, and thanks to my patrons as always too. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.